Welcome and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Utilizing Volunteers in Child Abduction Search Operations. My name is Adam Ash, and I'm with OJJDP's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. As your technical host, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of the Adobe Connect webinar platform and provide a few announcements to keep in mind. For those of you wishing to download a copy of the PowerPoint slides and the presenter bio, you may do so by locating the handouts pod in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Click on the name of the file and click the download button. During today's webinar, there will be a Q&A session where the presenter will address some of the questions posed during the presentation. Please type your question into the chat pod as they arise. For those of you participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a minute and help us count. Go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people joining you today. If you're joining alone, there's no need to type anything at this time. Following today's webinar, you'll be provided with a link to a brief survey about today's presentation. The feedback you provide is used to assist in future planning and training. In addition, attendees will be sent a certificate of attendance. The certificate is sent approximately 1 hour following the conclusion of the event and is sent via an Adobe Connect thank you email. Please keep an eye on your email for your certificate. Finally, this event will be archived in approximately 3 weeks on OJJDP's online university at ojjdpou.org, where you can also view our past webinars. Again, thank you for joining us today. I will now turn it over to our moderator for today's webinar, Nadia Tunstall.
Thank you, Adam, for that introduction. My name is Nadia Ely, and I'm a project coordinator with the National Criminal Justice Training and Technical Assistance Center, representing the Amber Alert Training and Technical Assistance Center. The Amber Alert TTA program has partnered with OJJDP's National Training and Technical Assistance Center to host this webinar as part of the Amber Alert webinar series. In conjunction with our mission, this series works together to bring state, local, and tribal subject matter experts to present and discuss critical issues related to missing, abducted, and exploited children. To learn more about the Amber Alert program, our training and technical assistance opportunities, and to view past webinars, please visit the website link available on the slide. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce and turn today's presentation over to our presenter and subject matter expert, Chuck Flieger. Chuck?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. First off, I'd like to welcome everybody. I'd also like to thank you for taking time out of what I know is everybody's very busy schedule to participate in this webinar. We are hopeful that as a result of today, you'll gain some insight and that you'll feel an increased level of preparedness as you move forward from today. This is a critical part of any response to a child abduction incident, and efforts that you invest now will pay dividends down the road if it ever becomes needed. Now, normally, Nadia or the moderator would do an introduction of me and we would proceed forward. I thought it was important today to kind of start off by sharing a little bit about my history and how I think it impacts my involvement with this issue. And I think by doing so, we will find some common ground that's not only with each other, but with those persons that we might come into contact with during these types of events. So just a little bit about myself. I currently have 31 years of total law enforcement experience, the last 28 of which have been with my hometown agency, the College Station Police Department. I started my law enforcement career in the United States Army as a military police officer. Now, during my time with College Station, I've had a variety of assignments. It's included a patrol officer, narcotics and gang, patrol sergeant, investigative sergeant, a lieutenant. I even spent a little bit of time as a public information officer. Currently, I'm assigned as the Administrative Services Bureau Commander, and I oversee the majority of our civilian professional staff members. That includes our communications section, holding facility, records, evidence, animal control. I've also had the pleasure of working with our regional Amber Alert notification plan since 2003, and I've been able to serve as one of our coordinators of our multi-county child abduction response team, or CART, since 2011. Now, I tell you all that to emphasize this point to you, is that child abduction response is not in my current job description. I do this type of work because of a desire to help protect children, and my boss has been gracious enough to allow me to continue to work in these projects despite it not being in my organizational area of responsibility. This is probably very similar to the desire and the passion that you feel with regards to child protection issues and why you're on a webinar of this nature today. Additionally, it's probably going to be very similar to what volunteers wish to do when they come out to help with missing children emergencies. And I think that that's a very important point to remember as we move forward. So let's kind of define the issue a little bit when it comes to child abduction. We're going to talk very briefly about a couple of studies that are referred to very frequently in child abduction response training. Now, while these studies have been in existence for a period of time, over 10 years, they're still very valuable as a means to talk in general terms about the scope of the problem and the importance that timely and prepared response plays in responding to these. The first study that we're going to talk about is NISMART, or the National Incident Studies of Missing, Abducted, Runaway, and Thrown Away Children. Now, the original study was published in 1990 and was updated with NISMART 2 in 2002. And the study goes into a lot of details about different types of missing children issues and events, but for the purposes of this webinar, it gives us a good framework to use when discussing the frequency of child abduction cases. NISMART estimates that there are approximately 1.3 million children that are what they call caretaker missing each year. And of those, approximately 800,000 are then subsequently reported to law enforcement, meaning now that there needs to be some type of a response. Now, there's a variety of reasons why someone would not be reported missing, but most of the time it's because the child is found very quickly, probably prior to contacting authorities. Now, of those 1.3 million, they estimate that approximately 100 to 200 are what they call stereotypical kidnappings. And of those, 60 to 150 children are murdered each year. Now, if you do the math, 60 out of 1.3 million equals 0.00046, or about 4/1000th of a percent. These worst-case scenarios account for only 1 in every 21,000 missing children incidents, whether they're criminal in nature or not. The second study that we'll talk about is the Washington State Child Abduction Homicide Study. That was first conducted in 1993 to 97 and then updated in 2006. Overall, this study examined over 750 of these worst-case scenarios, these nightmare cases, where a child is abducted and murder is the end result. And what they were able to find out is that if a child is abducted and subsequently murdered, 76% of the time they're murdered within the first 3 hours. So this goes to show that our time is absolutely critical, and these are very time-sensitive responses. In addition to the critical need for a timely response, they're also extremely manpower-intensive endeavors. So because of all these factors, our response is absolutely critical, and it's especially true when it comes to our readiness as it pertains to organization and planning. And we hope to show that this need for planning applies just as much to the use of volunteers in child abduction cases. These cases, which as I said before, are statistically very, very rare. They are a shock to the conscience, and they can forever change a community. They move people because incidents involving children hit home. They're emotional. They're tough. Because they are so rare, most first responders will likely never have to deal with one in their career, and that's a good thing. Most communities will never experience one, but those that do are significantly altered and impacted. Even though they are rare, we must never lose sight of the fact that these do occur, and therefore we have to prepare to respond in an appropriate fashion. A response to a child abduction case is a skill set, and like any other skill set, that can erode over time if we don't continue to maintain our proficiency. These responses are very low in frequency, but I personally can't think of a more critical response that I, as a law enforcement officer, could ever undertake in my career. These cases move not just individuals, but entire communities. We can learn from the past, and we can use these examples to help guide our efforts. So knowing what the human response is can help us anticipate how we will need to react. We're going to discuss very briefly 2 examples of missing children cases that impacted their communities, both in the short and in the long term. The first case is the Laura Smither case example. Now, Friendswood, Texas is a small community south of Houston off of I-45. On April 3, 1997, 12-year-old Laura Kate Smither went for a jog in her neighborhood. She was only supposed to be gone for a short period of time. When she didn't return, her family began searching and contacted authorities. Within a short period of time, an immense search process began. In the 17 days that followed, while Laura was still missing until her body was recovered approximately 11 miles away in a Pasadena retention pond, over 6,000 spontaneous volunteers were utilized in a variety of appropriate assignments, assisting in the overall effort. And this overflow of spontaneous volunteers led to the creation of the Laura Recovery Center, which subsequently helped with the management of over 100 large-scale community-based search efforts. Another case example to briefly consider is the case of Sierra LaMar. Sierra was last seen on March 16th of 2012 after the 15-year-old disappeared without a trace as she was supposed to ride a bus to school that morning in Morgan Hill, California. Very quickly, volunteers began to assist in many appropriate search assignments. These efforts continued for an extended period of time, and official weekly community searches did not conclude until 3 years later in March of 2015. There's still a dedicated website of findsierralamar.com that's related to volunteer searches. As of today, Sierra has not been recovered, but volunteer searchers continue to vow to continue their efforts, and these included a search effort on the 4-year anniversary in 2016. So we need to understand that communities will respond rapidly and in force, as was the case with Laura Smither, and they will also sustain their efforts over time, as evidenced with Sierra LaMar, so we must be ready. In order to make a most appropriate use of this resource, we must work in advance to plan our reaction. We know that this reaction is most assuredly going to occur, so we need to begin our preparation now. As with any resource and deployment, it's important to look at benefits and risks associated and that are known in advance. Before we begin, it's helpful to define some terms that are commonly used in missing children investigations. With these particular terms, we should understand and quantify what they are, as they sometimes are used interchangeably. The first is canvassing. This is an effort primarily aimed at finding information to drive the investigation. It's used to seek out witnesses or other people with information. This can include unknowing witnesses, which are individuals who may have seen something, heard something, or know something. They just don't realize its relevance until they're asked. These efforts aid in the identification of involved persons and locations significant to the investigation, such as place last seen, routes of travel, abduction site, and the like. These efforts are usually associated with door-to-door and knock-and-talk efforts. And these efforts take personnel in direct face-to-face contact with a variety of people under sometimes unknown circumstances. The second term is search. This effort is primarily to find physical things that are related to the investigation. This can be location of physical evidence in the form of clues. It can help aid in establishing direction of travel. The location of items found in this process can lead to other areas to perform canvass operations. And this searching can aid the investigation in a variety of ways. Now, there has been some debate as to the appropriate use of personnel in canvass operations. One reason for concern is that in many instances, there is documented history of suspects being contacted very early on during an investigation, most often before they're even identified as a potential suspect. As a result, there's a higher likelihood that danger could exist during these door-to-door operations. Personnel approaching the door of an offender before they are identified as such are at greater risk because of the unknown factor facing them, while the suspect is fully aware of what they have done. Utilization of sworn or armed personnel that are equipped with appropriate authority, such as that for arrest, search, or use of force, as well as equipment to confront potentially volatile or dangerous situations, is the best way to handle potential outcomes. So as a result, it's recommended that sworn personnel only be used for door-to-door canvass operations. Just as we talked about terminology with search and canvass, it's important to recognize distinctions between differing types of volunteers. The first type to discuss are professional and pre-screened volunteer groups. Now, these are going to be the groups that have already been through some sort of vetting process and are trained in advance as it pertains to their particular skill set. Most often, they're very organized and ready to assist and require very little preparation time to get mobilized and provide value to your incident. This is going to include many search and rescue organizations, most of whom are already known and active and working within your community. It can also include other community groups or service organizations such as Red Cross, CERT, and Citizens Police Academy Alumni Associations are examples. The second group to discuss are most often referred to as spontaneous volunteers. And they're the result of that outpouring of community response and concern for a particular event that we discussed earlier. Most are driven by a sincere desire to help. They're simply good people who are trying to do the right thing. Because of the spontaneous nature of their involvement, most, if not all, will have no training or experience in search operations. And so our focus will be on these spontaneous volunteers. Both types of volunteers absolutely are capable of providing benefits to your operation, but in very different capacities. With regards to professional or pre-screened volunteers, what they're able to bring to the table is easier to quantify. They're able to provide a specific skill set, whatever that may be, that can enhance law enforcement's investigative efforts. As we talked about a moment ago, mostly this is going to be including your professional search and rescue groups who can provide their specialized abilities as well as their dedicated resources to help them accomplish their mission. Some other groups might have experience in organizing a volunteer search venue, training, organizing, or managing volunteers. This could include groups like CERT, or Community Emergency Response Teams. Overall, they're able to be utilized as an asset in managing the phenomenon of spontaneous volunteers. Another group to mention in this, while they're not volunteers, but are also an extremely valuable asset in managing these groups, is our emergency managers and their participation in assisting with these efforts. Now, spontaneous volunteers are able to provide very tangible benefits to the response, and they shouldn't be overlooked. During early hours in the ongoing part of child abduction investigations, there are numerous tasks to be completed, and these can often be overwhelming for the resources of many departments. The community outpouring of personnel can provide the numbers to assist in appropriate assignments and allow specific deployment of sworn resources for assignments that need their specific skill set or authority. These volunteers can also be used with appropriate training to supplement and leverage trained and vetted search and rescue assets to cover more areas in a more timely manner. As with any effort, especially when there are a variety of unknown factors, there are potential risks, and these must be evaluated and accounted for in your planning. We can start off with just the amount of people. As stated before, the outpouring of spontaneous volunteers can overwhelm many entities' ability to manage that sheer number. One need only refer back to the case examples at the start of this webinar to serve as a reminder. Another example of outpouring of community involvement was the case of Sirnar Mu. Now, this occurred in South Salt Lake City in 2008 when Sirnar Mu, a 7-year-old refugee from Thailand living with her family, disappeared about 2 p.m. one afternoon as she was last seen walking through her apartment complex parking lot. In that particular incident, there were over 1,200 spontaneous volunteers who arrived to help during the first 1.5 days of the CART, or the Child Abduction Response Team, deployment. And at that time, that team only had one person designated as a volunteer coordinator. As a result, this aspect quickly became overwhelming and unmanageable. As stated before, with regard to training, most if not all spontaneous volunteers won't have training in search operations. If they did, they most likely, if they had some type of specialized training, they most likely would have responded with or been associated with one of the many pre-screened or professional organizations. So as a result, they must be provided with some base level of training to meet the expectations of the mission. When it comes to utilization of spontaneous volunteers, it brings a level of accountability to an organization. To some degree, that agency will be accountable for their efforts, for their safety, and for any activity they become involved with while working for the operation. The recommendation is to consult with your legal advisor for the best and most effective way to proceed while still using those who wish to help to the fullest and most efficient capacity. Another risk pertains to the diverting of resources towards the management, training, or control of these citizens. We've talked about the numbers involved, so if you don't have structure or resources in place, it's quite possible that other resources will have to be taken away from their primary and very crucial assignment to assist in managing these volunteers to reduce the risks that we've talked about. As we've stated a couple of times, the vast majority of people responding are just good people trying to assist in a very difficult and stressful time. There are, however, others with ulterior motives. In the Washington State Child Homicide Study that we spoke about earlier, it was found that in about 10% of those cases, the killer interjected themselves into the investigation, most often participating in public events such as volunteer searches. Now, while this is a small percentage of an even smaller portion of all missing children events, we must never lose sight of it and always consider that possibility. So let's talk about some of the proposed best practices when it comes to planning and responding to the outpouring of spontaneous volunteers. We know this outpouring is going to come, and by knowing this, you've already taken one of the first steps to prepare a plan in advance of an actual child abduction event. Additionally, your attendance in this webinar will assist in that first step, because by doing so and recognizing the issue, you are ahead of many other agencies. Utilization of volunteers in appropriate circumstances is absolutely critical, and identification of those appropriate assignments should be accomplished through consultation with law enforcement agencies and the designated search manager. And these assignments will be based on the specifics of each case, but there are some general assignments that are prevalent during most child abduction incidents. These can include things such as public area searches, assisting with grid searches in fields or open areas, wide area searches consisting of mainly non-populated areas that are of relevance to the investigation, such as fields, woods, etc. Flyer distribution. While this is not a true search, it is a means of soliciting or searching for information about the incident and can be a very important aspect of a response. Other areas that spontaneous volunteers can be used to assist is in support efforts, such as helping to man rehab locations for search and rescue organizations, helping to provide and deliver food and supplies to individuals out on posts. Could be to help support operations at a volunteer center. Any types of other tasks that don't necessarily require some form of prior training or certification. There's always going to be a need to guide and direct anyone who responds and is used to assist your efforts. People genuinely want to help, and for the most part, they're going to assist in any way that they're asked. But due to their lack of knowledge, they want guidance, and they want clear expectations as to what they are expected to do. If they're not provided the proper guidance, there are risks associated with that. Because of their desire to help, if they're not utilized, if they're shunned or turned away, or if they're not given appropriate training or sufficient guidance and oversight, they may seek out unauthorized avenues to do something. This could be forming something on their own or through affiliation with disreputable organizations who are seeking to capitalize on an incident. It starts with having a plan. Whether searchers prove to be a help or a hindrance depends in large part on planning done in advance. One prime area of planning that can be done in advance is designation of appropriate venues for running volunteer operations. This planning can consist of identification of venues within your area of response that meet most or all of the desired aspects. Venues must be accessible to the public in a location that does not interfere with the overall incident command or security of sensitive areas such as crime scenes, victim residence, or things of that nature. The appropriate location should include sufficient resources to accommodate the anticipated number of people as it pertains to parking, protection from inclement weather, facilities, suitable locations for briefings or debriefings of your search teams. Having the ability to have secure areas for planning, maps, photographs, things that perhaps are not needing to be publicly displayed or may be sensitive in nature. You want to have some appropriate media access. It's very important to continue to keep the case in the spotlight. You don't want people to forget about it. We want people to know about the case, and we want to keep information going to help increase the chances of a recovery of this missing child. Another important task to be considered and completed is appropriate background checks on prospective volunteers. Just a few moments ago, we talked about 10% of offenders who interject themselves into the investigation. So you should work in conjunction with law enforcement to perform thorough checks to rule out persons with inappropriate criminal history. This could include crimes against children or violent crimes, persons under protective order, or other criminal history that could call into question their involvement in a search operation for a missing child. As part of this process, there should be full documentation of all volunteers who request to or who are cleared to participate in the search for memorialization in the appropriate case file. It's very important that we train anyone participating in search operations as to our expectations. Our primary objective is always the safe recovery of the child. A secondary objective is to prepare a prosecutable case against the offender. Through proper screening and evaluation, you can determine possible physical limitations and assign appropriately for your volunteers. Training as to the expectations regarding discovery of evidence is probably one of the most important things that you can do to teach to a prospective volunteer. Make sure that they know what to do if they find possible evidence, as well as what not to do. Briefings and assignments of all personnel is absolute necessity. Part of the briefing is to ensure that they are equipped for the terrain and the weather that they may be facing. Areas of rugged or dangerous terrain might be best handled by professional search and rescue organizations to avoid having to respond to assist searchers put in situations beyond their capabilities. There should be a clear chain of command so that they know who they are to report to, and they should work with the search manager to clearly define boundaries of their assigned search area. Team leaders most likely from vetted or pre-selected organizations with appropriate training, must have a manageable span of control. As it pertains to overall search management, there are several things to consider. Security is one aspect. Efforts must be made to keep all non-searchers out of a designated area during those search operations. Containment is critical. Searchers must be instructed in the proper process in staying with evidence until relieved by appropriate evidence collection persons or teams to maintain chain of custody for possible prosecution. All areas of concealing a victim or evidence must be searched, and these could be many and varied. This could include abandoned wells, abandoned vehicles. This may take you over rugged or dangerous terrain, but that again should be handled by properly trained and equipped professionals. Additionally, you need to be wary of anyone overly anxious to join search efforts or trying to direct search operations in a certain direction. It's important to track the activity of all personnel involved in all aspects of the search efforts. Search management must know who is in what area, when they were there, and what they were assigned to do. This documentation could help in recreating timelines if a case becomes protracted in nature. Team leaders should keep all searchers together in range of sight and voice. This is facilitated by having a manageable span of control, as discussed before. But you also need to make sure that your searchers are easily visible through the use of vests or some other identification that is readily apparent. Team leaders should be able to log what is done out in the field to be able to report back at a later time in accurate and sufficient detail. And then you need to have a plan in place if you have a searcher who becomes lost, injured, or ill. Debriefings are absolutely critical. Upon completion of assignment, all members of the team must participate in the debriefing to effectively gather information that can be reported back or used in planning subsequent search operations. The team leader must formally report back group effort findings for complete documentation of all search efforts. Everyone who is checked in has to then check out to then complete the process. This slide here is just an example of a volunteer process. This came from the state of Utah and their child abduction response team, and it's just a cyclical process where an individual will come in, they'll register. During orientation, there is some type of a background check performed. The volunteers will then be assigned to a particular team with oversight and guidance where they'll receive a briefing. The team then moves to where they are then signed out to a specific designated search area. They complete their search operations. It should be a manageable amount of area to be searched by the team, commensurate with their skills, equipment, and abilities. Then they need to come and they need to sign back in, so we account for everybody. And then they go through a debriefing to learn what was accomplished during their search operations. As we move towards the end, we're going to talk about some resources that are available to you as you continue this process of planning your response if you are ever confronted with a situation that you need to utilize information learned in this webinar. There's many available resources out there to assist you in your training and planning. And a lot of these organizations that exist to assist in the training and raising awareness formed out of some tragic events. The first one we're going to talk about is the Laurel Recovery Center. And we talked about that at the beginning of the webinar. And this was formed after the kidnapping and murder of 12-year-old Laura Smither. This organization served their community, their state, and their nation for almost 2 decades until shuttering their operations a few years ago. They do, however, have one resource that's still available to anyone, and that is an extensive manual on managing a community-based search that's still available on their website at the link provided on this slide. This manual promotes a partnership between law enforcement, the community, and the victim family. And again, it is an excellent resource available for anybody to download and review and using in planning their operations. Another organization that I've had the pleasure of working with over the years is the Texas Center for the Missing. And this is based out of Houston, Texas. This organization was formed in 2000 after the death of 17-year-old Gabriel Lester, who had been reported missing. His mother decided to turn tragedy into something to have a positive effect on missing children and their families. They are a provider of training for many law enforcement agencies throughout the state. They provide public education on missing children awareness, prevention, and other education training. Finally, the CEO of the Texas Center for the Missing serves as the regional Amber Alert and Child Abduction Response Team coordinator for a 14-county region with a population of over 6 million. Ryan United was formed in response to the 1987 abduction and murder of 8-year-old Ryan Van Lushen by a repeat sex offender. This organization, founded and run by his brother Derek Van Lushen, they seek to teach communities, criminal justice organizations, and others how to develop best practices for keeping children in a community safe. In addition to running Ryan United, Derek is also a part of Team Adam, which is a resource available to all law enforcement agencies through the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And their goals are to motivate, strengthen, challenge, and teach. The next organization is Class Kids, whose mission is stated as to stop crimes against children. And this organization was formed in honor of 12-year-old Polly Klaas after her abduction and murder in 1993. And they are able to offer nationwide on-site search management while providing liaison with family, law enforcement, and the community. They were the oversight and management aspect of the volunteer searches related to the LaMar case that we mentioned earlier. They're able to provide case management, a search manager, as well as assist in search planning. And the Laura Recovery Center, which I spoke of just a moment ago, they turned over all of their operational search assets to the Class Kids National Search Center based in Florida under the direction of Brad Dennis. Another resource that we've spoken about a couple of times is CERT, or Community Emergency Response Teams. Now, while these teams were originally formed for community members to assist in disaster response, it does provide all of their members with light search and rescue training to all of its participants. Its members additionally are encouraged to support emergency response agencies by taking an active role in emergency preparedness projects. And I can speak from personal experience is in that they provide support for our local child abduction response team. And they will be our first wave of support in helping to manage any outpouring of spontaneous volunteers if we are ever to need their assistance. The last resource that I'll talk about is the National Criminal Justice Training Center. And again, I can speak from personal experience. I have availed myself to many of the training resources available through this organization. Excellent training. They have classroom offerings that include courses such as CART, or Child Abduction Response Team training, as well as the certification ability. Investigative strategies for child abduction cases. They have specialized training on forensic response, canvassing search and recovery strategies, as well as child abduction search tactics. So there's a whole plethora of different training offerings. Additionally, they have a vast selection of online opportunities that include community and criminal justice focused programs. This includes an online new CART member training. It has an online version of the investigative strategies for missing and abducted children. It also has, which is I would highly recommend to any agency out there, any law enforcement agency, is to have their personnel, their patrol officers, as well as their public safety telecommunicators complete the online courses that are really provide a good baseline of knowledge in how to respond to missing child incidents. And those are the patrol first response to missing and abducted children, as well as telecommunicators' best practices for missing and abducted children. Additionally, as we mentioned before, Team Adam is a resource available to any law enforcement agency throughout the country. These specially selected and trained retired law enforcement professionals are able to respond and assist an agency in dealing with a child abduction case, and they bring not only their vast knowledge and experience, but they bring to bear the resources of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So it is extremely, extremely valuable and free resource available to any agency that wishes to partake. With that in closing, I will go ahead and I'm going to be turning it back over to Nadia, who is going to be bringing forth some of the questions. Again, the one thing that I would say is that don't let this webinar be the conclusion of all of your volunteer preparation efforts. There is any number of different resources. There are any number of individuals who have vast amounts of experience in this. Go and talk to them. Develop those relationships. Learn from their experiences and use those experiences to help you in your planning efforts. And with that, I will turn it back over to Nadia.
Thanks, Chuck. And we had just a few questions come in, and I'd like to encourage the audience to continue to submit questions during this Q&A portion. The first question for you, Chuck, is what should agencies do to ensure that they are prepared for possible abduction prior to an incident?
Well, the one thing, and I can speak again from my personal experience, is you need to make sure that your policies and your procedures are in place, as well as that you expose all of your personnel to appropriate training, because a child abduction case is going to be an incredibly stressful situation. And in law enforcement, what happens is when we are under stress, we revert back to our training. We revert back to what we know. And if we haven't been exposed to some of the concepts and the things that we talked about just very briefly in this webinar, if we haven't been exposed to it and we haven't been trained in it and understand that while a statistically small chance, there's always a chance that this child could come back in 5 minutes, or it could turn into a protracted investigation, the likes of which you would never want to be involved in. But you need to, same as you would with a SWAT team, just because your SWAT team doesn't get called out all the time doesn't mean you stop training. I would very, very much encourage any agency to make sure that their policies and procedures are very thorough, and that their personnel are trained and periodically have refresher training on it, because again, it's a skill set. And if you don't continue to bolster that skill set, you will lose proficiency in it.
The next question is, if one is dealing with hundreds of volunteers, how do they ensure that they conduct a viable background search? And what are some considerations generally for vetting volunteers?
One of the ways is, again, is to have a plan in place to understand, okay, what is our process going to be? And it could be something similar to the flow chart that we showed a few slides back, to where with our particular team, we have a volunteer waiver and indemnification form where I got my city legal involved in it, and it turned into a 6-page form that we got back down to 1 page. But basically, it stipulates the expectations of the volunteer by signing, being somebody over the age of 18, they consent to a criminal history check to make sure they don't have any outstanding warrants, to make sure that they don't have any type of, again, inappropriate criminal history, because again, you wouldn't want to have somebody with a crime against a child participating in your search. You also then need to dedicate the resources, again, understanding what the potential amount of people is. Again, just looking back at the Laura Smither case, in 17 days, they encountered and utilized 6,000 people. That's going to take a lot of support staff to help manage that. That's just you got to have 6,000 different forms. You have to have people to manage that flow of intaking the forms, getting it to law enforcement to perform the appropriate background checks, to report those findings back to someone to oversee your volunteer search operations. I would definitely designate person or persons to be oversight of that logistical administrative portion of it. Again, the search manual from the Laura Recovery Center goes into immense detail about this process and provides suggestions. One of the things that I would say is don't just find one resource. Talk to multiple agencies and then take what they have and tailor it to your particular region, to your particular area, and find what is going to work for your city or your county or for whatever area of responsibility that you're looking at. I hope that answered the question.
Thanks, Chuck. And the next question is, what has been your experience with family members of missing children who want to volunteer to participate in the search? What are the risks and benefits involved?
That in utilization of family members, that's a whole nother dynamic that we really didn't touch upon in this particular webinar. One aspect that I would highly recommend is that you have a family liaison. You want to make sure and do your due diligence. You want to make sure and quickly rule out the family for any possible involvement. And then the same as with other volunteers, you want to involve them to the level appropriate. I can't say that there's a definitive bright line on what to do. It's going to be based on the facts of each case. But one thing I know from listening to family members of abducted children is that they want to be involved. They want to be heard, and they want to be involved to the extent possible. They don't want to jeopardize the investigation, but it's their child, it's their family member. They want to do what they can to help. So as quickly as you can rule them out as possible involvement, you want to involve them to an appropriate level. And again, that's going to be based upon the facts of the case. And so I wish I could provide a more concrete answer on that, other than the resources you need to designate to be with the family and care for the family is just as important as the resources that you dedicate to other efforts, such as managing volunteers.
The next question is, what are some considerations for law enforcement to ensure that they provide adequate support to volunteers, physical resources, things to support volunteers both mentally and emotionally during the search process?
Very, very good question. One resource that I would, for sure, that I mentioned in the webinar that I would bring involved in that would be your local emergency management coordinators. That is a huge aspect of their job. They are there to help provide and to help organize massive response efforts. Most of the time it's in things, particularly in my area of the country, it's in things such as hurricane responses, things of that nature. But they can work and avail themselves to resources outside of the area on a regional and or state level. They can coordinate and work with agencies such as the American Red Cross, because again, you do want to take care of the physical well-being of the searchers, and that's going to, especially like if when, again, going back to my area of the country, we're in a period of time of year where it's routinely 105 degrees plus, so you have to consider their physical care as well as you mentioned, their emotional care. So you want to make sure and take care of them as well, and so avail yourself to you can work with your victim advocates to help provide the necessary care for your individuals that may be involved in a search as well. So again, that's a good point to bring up. You certainly want to care for them even after they leave, and they're providing that immediate service to your search operation.
So that's a perfect segue into our next question. The question is, in what ways can law enforcement agencies strengthen their relationships with volunteer groups before an incident and after the search is over?
I guess if I had to stress one word on this, it's relationships. You don't want to meet the coordinator from your local Red Cross or your local CERT team or your local search and rescue organization. You don't want to meet them for the first time when you get that call. You need to develop those relationships in advance. One thing that I always tell, like when I talk to the officers that I work with, and especially when we're talking about CART, is I don't need to be an expert on everything. I don't need to be a search and rescue expert. I need to know who in my area is, and I need to know just enough about their job to have an intelligent conversation so that they can tell me what their capabilities are. I can tell them what I'm requesting of them, and we can have that dialogue and with them and that search manager so that we can come up with a plan. But the time to do that is not when you get that 911 phone call. At that point, you're reacting. It is strictly reaction, and you don't have time to be proactive. Now is the time to be proactive and to know who those people are, involve them in your efforts in advance, develop those relationships in advance. Because again, I think we're all here on this webinar, when you boil it down through everything else, we're all here because we care about the same thing and we want to protect our children, and we're willing to do what we need to do to be in the best position to do that.
The next question is, how should agencies respond to volunteers who are minors who want to search?
Our particular group, and I did see at least one comment floating through on the chat, is we do not utilize anyone under the age of 18 because we have them sign a form to where they can agree to this release of liability or whatever terminology your legal department will put on it, just simply because of the facts of, we want to put personnel out in safe environments, but we can't always guarantee what will occur. And so we certainly, when we're out looking for a missing child, we certainly don't want to put other children in harm's way. So we would not use anyone under the age of 18.
One participant has recently employed ham operators to set up a network of road and highway searchers. Have you tried this method, and what are the pros and cons?
I'm not 100% sure I understand what the question is. If it is in regards to communication amongst searchers, or if you're talking about more along the lines of getting the word out to the vast number of people. I guess I'll address the communications aspect first. There are going to be a variety of different agencies that may respond to a child abduction incident. They're going to have a variety of different capacities when it comes to communication, some of which include law enforcement, perhaps with the 700 or 800 trunking devices. You could have VHF, you could have ham operators. You just have to have some mechanism to pull those communications together. We have patching capabilities with a mobile command post in my region. But then again, that would be a communications plan. That would be something that you need to decide upon in advance, and it's something that could be pretty easily done beforehand, as opposed to trying to figure it out on the fly. With regards to if the question was about getting the word out to a variety of people, I don't think you can get enough people looking for your child or your suspect. So if you have more eyes looking, whether it's through Amber Alert, social media, through CB radios, through ham radios, if you've got more eyes looking for your victim, you hopefully will increase your chances of a safe recovery. I hope that addressed the person's question.
Chuck, and the final question I see that we have here today is, how can law enforcement agencies find professional volunteer groups in their area? What are some good resources?
I would start, again, I can speak from my personal organization, or from my personal experience, is start with the ones that you know already. We communicate with, we utilize our Citizens Police Academy Alumni Association. We utilize our regional CERT teams. And then those individuals that are involved in those organizations, as well as some of our private search and rescue organizations. And what I find is that the individuals that are involved in those aren't the only organizations that they're involved in. And so you can talk to them. They're going to be like-minded, and they're going to know about other people that have that same civic-mindedness and desire to serve. And then that way you can go ahead and start determining, okay, what other organizations are out there that might be of assistance to us I just may not be aware of. So I'd start by polling the ones that you know, because I guarantee you they're going to come up with some organizations that you've never heard of, and you can then determine if they're going to be a good fit.
Thanks, Chuck, and I see that that's all of the questions that we have here today. So I'd like to thank you for providing us your insight and responding to our audience's questions. But before we close, I'd like to also thank our audience members for participating in today's webinar. Future announcements from the Amber Alert Training and Technical Assistance Program will be made in the coming weeks. I'd also like to remind folks that some of the training programs you listed, both in person and online, can be located using the link on their screen. The link is available in the downloadable handouts as well. I'll turn the presentation back over to you, Adam, for final close.
Thank you, Nadia, and again, thank you, Lieutenant Fleener, for a great presentation on a very important topic. We do have a couple quick reminders before we close out. We want to remind you that the webinar is archived in approximately 3 weeks at ojjdpou.org. And again, you have contact information on your screen for NTTAC and the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And we also want to remind you that the presentation is expressed by the presenter and not necessarily of OJJDP. And we also finally want to remind you to please complete the online evaluation. And we hope everyone has a great afternoon. Thank you for joining us.